Why'd you stop being a diversity officer?
I just thought it was a useless thing. There's a better way to go about doing this.
In the U.S. in 2020, DEI was a $3.4 billion industry.
I believe that white people are born into not being human.
DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. A concept that sounds responsible and admirable at its core, so it's no wonder that nearly every modern company introduced some sort of diversity training. And this is not just some gimmick either. Companies spend a lot of money on these courses. Just in 2020 alone, DEI was a $3.4 billion industry. With such large investments, you would think that these training are effective, right? Well, think again. Because according to Harvard Business Reviews, the diversity of certain minorities, especially black women, actually decreased after 5 years of diversity training. So today we'll take a look at why diversity programs fail and why DEI actually stands for Division, Exclusion, Intolerance. But before I tell you all about the hard facts regarding this issue, I want to show you what an expert in this field has to say about it. Eric Smith was a diversity officer at Drew University, but eventually stepped down from his position. So let's hear what exactly made him quit.
Why'd you stop being a diversity officer?
I just thought it was a useless thing. There's a better way to go about doing this.
Is it effective?
No. In fact, it seems to be doing worse. It seems to be making people less likely to interact with people who are unlike them, because it's like a minefield now.
Less likely to interact.
After a training where you hear things about microaggressions, if you ask somebody what they do for a living, somehow that's racist, right? If you learn that, then why would you take a chance?
I better not talk to Eric because I might say something wrong.
Precisely. So now inclusion means I'm going to silence myself and not talk to the black people. The thesis of this training was try to be less white. They're talking about arrogance and things like that. That is by no means a white thing. The point is to demonize the other side as much as possible. People don't say what they feel because they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to be called racist. People are censoring, and we have to stop doing that.
Eric makes a fantastic point why DEI itself is not wrong, but our current implementation of it is so backwards that he had to quit. This is a highly complex topic, but let's try to analyze it as best as possible. We'll start by analyzing why our current diversity programs fail. But at the end of the video, I also want to talk about possible solutions and functional concepts that are already in place today. The first thing we have to do is to think about why companies began to promote diversity initially. Unsurprisingly, the answer is money. Beginning with the 2000s, many large companies faced high-profile lawsuits regarding race and sex discrimination. According to Harvard Business Reviews, in 2013 Bank of America, Merrill Lynch settled a race discrimination suit for $160 million. Cases like these brought Merrill's total 15-year payout to nearly $500 million. With that history in mind, it's no wonder that companies began to hire diversity officers and introduced internal diversity training. However, despite the efforts to improve and secure diversity, equality hasn't improved much in almost any sector. Harvard writes, although the proportion of managers at U.S. commercial banks who were Hispanic rose from 4.7% in 2003 to 5.7% in 2014, white women's representation dropped from 39% to 35%, and black men's from 2.5% to 2.3%. Even in Silicon Valley, where many companies plan to increase diversity for both business and social justice reasons, tech jobs remain dominated by white men. At first, that might sound like a contradiction, but by looking at the way most companies try to promote diversity, the problem becomes glaringly obvious. Large companies have long relied on diversity training to reduce bias on the job, hiring tests to limit it in recruitment and promotions, and grievance systems to give employees a way to challenge managers. But all those actions share one big flaw. They are all designed to prevent lawsuits, not to actually promote diversity. Studies show that this kind of force-feeding can activate bias rather than stamp it out. On top of that, social scientists have found people often rebel against rules to assert their autonomy. Just imagine a young child doing the opposite of what you tell him simply to demonstrate that they are their own person. And there is a simple reason for that. You can't just outlaw bias. Companies favor a classic command and control approach to diversity because it establishes simple do's and don'ts that are easy to enforce. But decades of social science research point to a simple truth. You won't get managers on board by blaming and shaming them with rules and re-education. Just like Eric Smith said in his interview, if you always fear to get shamed and labeled a racist for saying the wrong words, you stop taking that risk and thereby stop talking to minorities on the job. Now that we have established an overview of the issues, we can start to analyze where each diversity program goes wrong. Let's start with the hiring tests. About 40% of companies try to challenge bias with mandatory hiring tests assessing the skills of applicants. However, managers don't like being told that they can't hire whomever they please. And Harvard's research suggests that even the results of hiring tests are analyzed with bias. Companies that use written job tests for managers saw decreases of 4% to 10% in the share of managerial jobs held by white women, African American men and women, Hispanic men and women, and Asian American women. And no, group differences and educational standards don't explain that pattern. There are significant declines among white and Asian American women with high levels of education, which typically score well on standard managerial tests. So obviously hiring tests didn't increase diversity. But what about diversity training? It would only be logical for people who undergo these training to shed their biases, right? Well, not so much, because people are easily taught to respond correctly to a questionnaire about bias, but they soon forget the right answers. The positive effects of diversity training rarely last beyond a day or two, and a number of studies suggest that it can even increase bias. Let's look at some numbers. 5 years after establishing required training for managers, companies saw no improvement in the proportion of white women, black men, and Hispanics in management. Actually, the share of black women actually decreased by 9% on average, while the ranks of Asian American men and women shrank by 4% to 5%. Diversity officers like Eric Smith tell us that people often respond to compulsory courses with anger and resistance, and some actually report more animosity toward other groups afterward. To put it simply, companies too often signal that training is remedial. That brings us to only one conclusion, that diversity training, at least in the way it is currently used, is just a waste of time. Nonetheless, nearly half of mid-sized companies use it, as do nearly all the Fortune 500. It becomes clear that the moment we put diversity above actual qualifications, both the quality of work and diversity itself suffer. And this development isn't shocking, at least not to experienced businessmen. In this interview with Warren Buffett, he talks about how companies waste too much time on diversity and why this has a negative effect on the work quality.
24 men and women work with you, Warren, at our corporate office. I see from last year the quality of the picture has been improved in the annual report, so congratulations on that. However, looking at it, there is something that comes to anyone's attention, and is the lack of diversity among the staff. A 2015 analysis by Calvert Investments found that Coca-Cola was one of the best companies for workplace diversity, while Berkshire Hathaway was one of the worst. You've explicitly stated that you do not consider diversity when hiring for leadership roles and board members. Does that need to change? Are we missing any investment opportunities as a result? And do you consider diversity, however defined, of company leadership and staff when analyzing the value of a company that you may want to purchase?
Well, it's a multiple-part question. The answer to the last one is no. What was the one before it?
You've explicitly stated you do not consider diversity when hiring for leadership roles and board members. Does that need to change, and are we missing any investment opportunities as a result?
No, we will select board members, and we lay it out, and we've done so for years. And I think we've been much more explicit than most companies. We are looking for people who are business savvy, shareholder oriented, and have a special interest in Berkshire. And we found people like that. And as a result, I think we've got the best board that we could have. They're not in it. They're clearly not in it for the money. I get called by consulting firms who've been told to get candidates for directors for other companies. And by the questions they ask, it's clear they've got something other than the 3 questions we ask in terms of directors in mind. They really want somebody whose name will reflect credit on the institution, which means a big name. And one organization recently, the one that did the blood samples with small pricks, they got some very big names on their board. And Theranos, I think, is that the way you pronounce it, Charlie? Theranos?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the names are great, but we're not interested in people that want to be on the board because they want to make $200,000 or $300,000 a year, for 10% of their time. And we're not interested in the ones for whom it's a prestige item, and who want to go and check boxes or that sort of thing. So I think we will continue to apply that test: business savvy, shareholder oriented, and with a strong personal interest in Berkshire. And every share of the Berkshire that our shareholders own, they bought just like everybody else in this room. They haven't gotten them on option, or they haven't gotten, I've been on boards where they've given me stock. I get it for breathing, basically. At half a dozen places that are maybe 3 or 4 that I was on the board of. We want our shareholders to walk in the shoes, our directors to walk in the shoes of shareholders. We want them to care a lot about the business, and we want them to be smart enough so that they know enough about business that they know what they should get involved in and what they shouldn't get involved in. The people in the office, I'm hoping that when we take the Christmas picture again this year, they're exactly the same 25 that were there last year, even though we might have added 30,000 employees elsewhere and maybe 10 billion of sales or something like that. It's a remarkable group of people. And just take this meeting. Virtually every one of the 25, our CFO, my assistant, whoever, they've been doing job after job connected with making this meeting a success and a pleasant outing for our shareholders. It's a cooperative effort. The idea that you would have some department called annual meeting department, and you'd have a person in charge of it, and he would have an assistant, and then they would go to various conferences about holding annual meetings and build up, and then they'd hire consultants to come in and help them on the meeting. We just don't operate that way. It's a place where everybody helps each other. Part of what makes my job is extraordinarily easy, but the people around me really make it easy. And part of the reason it's easy is because we don't have any committees. Maybe we have some committee I don't know about, but I've never been invited to any committees. I'll put it that way at Berkshire. And we may have a PowerPoint someplace. I haven't seen it, and I wouldn't know how to use it anyway. We just don't have make work activities, and we might go to a baseball game together or something like that. But I've seen the other kind of operation, and I like ours better. I'll put it that way. Charlie?
We have talked about all those statistics and listened to several people with experience in the field, but what are the essential mistakes companies make when promoting diversity? Well, it's pretty simple: forcing a development instead of waiting for natural progression. Diversity can strengthen a company, but only if it comes naturally. Studies show that it's more effective to engage managers in solving the problem and increase their on-the-job contact with female and minority workers. That's why interventions such as targeted college recruitment, mentoring programs, self-managed teams, and task forces have boosted diversity in businesses. Like I said earlier, some of the most effective solutions aren't even designed with diversity in mind. We can see the same developments when we look at the effectiveness of diversity training. I already established that forced diversity training led to a decrease in diversity in the past 5 years. However, voluntary training evokes the opposite: an increase of 9% to 13% in Black men, Hispanic men, and Asian American men and women in management 5 years out. Research from the University of Toronto reinforces Harvard's opinions. In one study, white subjects read a brochure critiquing prejudice toward blacks. When people felt pressure to agree with it, the reading strengthened their bias against blacks. When they felt the choice was theirs, the reading reduced bias. Looking at the results, there is obviously a huge difference in effectiveness when it comes to forced training and voluntary training. So let's take a quick look at diversity training that actually has a positive effect. One method involves college recruitment programs. Studies suggest that managers willingly participate when invited, mostly because the message is positive. Help us find a greater variety of promising employees. The effects are striking. 5 years after a company implements a college recruitment program targeting female employees, the share of white women, black women, Hispanic women, and Asian American women in its management rises by about 10% on average. A program focused on minority recruitment increases the proportion of black male managers by 8% and black female managers by 9%. Another great way that naturally increases diversity is mentoring. In teaching their protégés, mentors help give their charges the breaks they need to develop and advance. The mentors then come to believe that their protégés merit these opportunities, whether they're white men, women, or minorities. Mentoring programs make companies' managerial echelons significantly more diverse. On average, they boost the representation of Black, Hispanic, and Asian American women and Hispanic and Asian American men by 9% to 24%. And those are just a few examples of what natural diversity can look like. And the most important aspect of the methods is that they never once sacrifice qualifications for artificial diversity. By simply interacting earlier and more with minority groups, the number of qualified minority employees rises. But let's come to a conclusion. Your company will become less diverse, not more, if you require managers to go to diversity training and try to regulate their hiring and promotion decisions. This might sound bad, but knowing this issue enables us to improve the situation. The examples demonstrated how natural diversity works. Now we only need more of it. But that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. This was Money Insight. And if you want to keep learning how money works, consider subscribing to my channel.